In our final segment, Chef Weber will make tea-scented cherry cookies, which is a type of refrigerator cookie that can be made and stored for baking at a later time. The recipe will yield 7 dozen 2/3 ounce cookies. Ingredients are 1 pound 2 ounces unsalted butter, softened, 10 ounces powdered sugar, 1/2 ounce of vanilla extract, 1 teaspoon salt, 2 teaspoons almond extract, 3 Earl Grey tea bags, individual serving size, 6 ounces diced cherries chopped coarse, egg wash and chopped almonds as needed.
In this segment, we will be preparing a very delightful and versatile tea-scented cherry cookie. My ingredients include unsalted butter, powdered sugar, flour that's been lightly scented, chopped dried cherries, salt, tea. This is an Earl Grey scented tea, and I'm going to comment about that in a minute. Pure vanilla extract and sliced almonds, and almond extract. The tea is the versatility part of the recipe. For the holidays, you could use chai tea, or if you were doing an Asian fusion, you could use a green tea if you wanted to have this cookie go towards the Asian fusion culture. You could also do lavender for the springtime. Any type of tea is possible. You could do jasmine tea, orange blossom tea, and it can be cut from the bag or purchased loose leaf and utilized that way. Again, with the dried fruits, you could substitute dried apricots. You could substitute dried golden raisins or currants if you wanted to have a different twist on that. We'll begin by using the KitchenAid, and the paddle attachment is the proper tool. We're going to thoroughly cream the butter and the sugar. The butter is soft. It's been softening at room temperature for about an hour, but again, it depends upon the temperature in your kitchen. And you need to start on speed slow because you don't want the powdered sugar flying out of the bowl. This cookie is what's referred to as an icebox cookie. Icebox cookies are excellent for production. We'll be discussing how to form them, but they're really handy during the heavy holiday season in the restaurant industry because they can be made up well in advance and stored either frozen or they can also be stored in the refrigerator for immediate use. Now all of my ingredients will be nearby, and as that's creaming thoroughly, my tool that I'm going to be using to form my icebox cookies into a very uniform method is a ruler. You could use a standard long engineer ruler if you want to. The one ruler you'd want to stay away from is wood because wood isn't acceptable usually in a health department situation, so you want metal that can be cleaned well. I'm going to turn my butter up a little bit. Of course, anytime you're using the KitchenAid, you want to thoroughly scrape down the paddle as it tends to collect at the base of the paddle and the bowl. And I'm ready to go ahead and add my flour in small increments. One thing you'll notice in this particular recipe is there's no eggs. It's a very tight cookie, similar to a shortbread cookie, but there is no eggs in the recipe. I don't want to add my dried fruit too early. If I add the dried fruit too early, I could risk creaming it and breaking the fruit up until it mashes into the mixture. So I want to thoroughly add all my dry. I'm going to leave a little bit and go ahead and add my 2 extracts. The almond. Always use pure extracts whenever possible. One of the things with cookies is if you use an alcohol-based imitation extract, it can cause spreading on the sheet pan. So whenever possible, use the integrity of a complete pure extract. Got all my flour. One of the keys with creaming is you want to be sure and not overwork the dough. It will cause the dough to spread. So I want to have a very brief shortbread type procedure on this. So don't overwork it thinking that you're creaming the dough to the point that you're adding a tender cookie. You're actually activating the gluten, which is an inert ingredient in the flour that will make the cookie tough. You want these very tender and crispy. So I'm going to go ahead and add my remaining ingredients. My cherry, my wonderful tea, the loose leaf tea, and almonds. A brief turn, and then I'm going to finish it off by hand. Remove the paddle. And I'm going to take all of the batter off of the paddle. One point of interest that I'd like to point out is that in the bottom of KitchenAids and Hobart's, there's a small button at the bottom, a depression on the bottom. Batter tends to collect at the base of that, so whenever you're hand finishing something, go ahead and get down to the bottom of that bowl and make sure and fold everything in that might have sat at the bottom of the bowl, particularly excess creamed butter and sugar. You could also utilize oil of bergamot in this in place of tea, but obviously in most restaurants or the hospitality industry, tea is readily available. Once I've worked that dough into a fairly uniform ball, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper, kitchen parchment paper. I'm going to lay it down on my workboard here. And I'm going to do a full-length one. You could do half sheet if you were wanting that much production, but I'm definitely going to want to go for the length of it for production purposes. And I'm going to slide my parchment down a little bit, and I want to gently roll the dough. And you'll notice I'm not using flour. I really don't need it. If it was a very sticky batter, I could, but this one tends to be fairly tight. Now, the size of your icebox cookie depends upon your desired end result. It could be a very large cookie or a small little petit four. So that's up to you as a chef what you need as far as the size of the cookie. You want it to be as uniform as possible. And at this point, those look perfect to me for what I'm after for this particular production. Now what I'm going to do to ensure that I have a very nice, tight, even icebox cookie is use the ruler to assist me in having a very good product. I'm going to take one short fold, and this technique can cross over from actually dropped cookie methods, which normally use an ice cream scoop for batters. If you wanted to do heavy production, you could do chocolate chip cookies in these, any type of cookie that would lend itself well to being sliced and then baked. After one turn, I'm going to take my ruler and pull it up the left side of it first, and pull the paper taut, very taut. And again, I'm going to repeat the process on the right side. What I'm doing is pulling all that batter in so that it's very even and level. Try not to handle it with your fingers or push down and make any indentation. The goal is to let the parchment paper do all of the work. Roll it slightly, and again, finish it one time so that it's very well packed. And it's up to you whether or not you want to twist the ends like a party favor for purposes of keeping it fresh, or you can just leave it as is. The key point once you finish your batter is the seam side down. I'd like you to store it and then clearly mark at least one of them, and then mark the top with clear wrap, your variety of cookie. So my particular variety is tea-scented cookies, and mark the date that they were made and the person that made them. The volume that you achieve as far as your yield will depend upon how thick you're cutting them and the size. Once you establish that, you can add that to your recipe so that you know exactly what your yield will be for larger parties, or in general to have that as a yield for the recipe. Now what will happen to them is they'll be frozen briefly for ease of cutting them, and we'll bake them off. Completing your icebox cookie is a fairly simple procedure. Decide on the tool which is most comfortable for you, either a large chef's knife, a small paring knife depending upon the size of the cookie, or a dough scraper. But the disadvantage of a dough scraper is if you don't make a clean cut and it's not straight up, which is easier to do with a knife, you could have an inferior product as far as the portion control. Usually the butt end here, I just throw that out or mush it in and make another cookie, but you need a square cut on the end. I prefer, myself, a large chef's knife, just because I can rock the knife up and down. The dough should be still relatively quite firm, but not directly out of the freezer or the ice box, because you want to be able to put your knife through the cookie batter. I'm going to make mine about a ½ inch thick. And again, your yield will depend upon the thickness and the size of the cookie. Once you've completed cutting them all out into the portion size that you want, put them onto a half-sheet lined or full-sheet lined cookie sheet with parchment paper. Be careful to put a cookie close to the end of the corner of the parchment, because if you're utilizing a convection oven, the parchment paper can blow up. So it's important that you pay attention to the corners. And I have some coming fresh out of the oven. Once those are finished, the color that you're looking for is a light golden brown on the edges and a tan to honey brown in the center. And they're just beautiful.